CPR 508. Now, CPR 508 was a 440 type steam engine, and if you recognize it, okay, look, you do. You do. I promise you that. 440s were one of the most prevalent type of steam engines used in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were an incredibly successful type of locomotive in terms of wheel arrangement. They are used as like the classic, old school train design, and often they are shortened to the American model, even though not only America used them. It wasn't just America and Canada. Plenty of countries utilized the 440 wheel arrangement because it turned out to be incredibly efficient and stable. And yeah, these were pretty good engines overall. So yeah, the year was 1900. On June 21st, 508 was operating in its usual route in northwestern New Brunswick when it was going over a bridge spanning the St. John River at Grand Falls. The bridge, for reasons that I have been yet to determine, actually collapsed under the train's weight, and the engine, along with most of the train, went into the river. Now, this was a mixed train. There were mostly freight cars, but there was a caboose as well as a passenger car at the end. However, fortunately, they were spared from going directly into the water, although the passenger car did run vertical. That was good. But like I said early on, nobody died. Though there were some injuries, no one was killed during this accident, fortunately. Now, a cleanup operation did happen, both to fix the bridge as well as to recover most of the cars. However, there was never any record of 508 being recovered, which was odd. But most people at the time didn't really worry about it, and it wasn't until a century later, in the year 2000, when a dude by the name of Eric Olette? Goodness, I hope I'm saying that correctly. First found out about the incident. Now, Eric actually worked with Canadian National Railways, but he was really curious about this incident because, like I said, there was no record of the train ever being taken out of the water. So he contacted CPR, trying to see if they have any records of this, and they insisted that it must have been because the engine continued to serve after the accident. But that's according to them. Eric really wasn't convinced because CPR seemed just kind of just assume it had been. Just that it was there, but maybe if it was taken out of the river. But he was still like, no. How did... He was curious, I'll give him that. So he started looking deeper, asking around locals and doing his further, more in-depth investigations using magnometers under the surface to try to see if there was something weird down there that might explain where this engine went off to. Because like I said, CPR insists that they did take it out, but by insists, they just say must have. Like, yeah, we probably did. Maybe. We don't remember. Look, just go away. So Eric started doing his own investigation. Occasionally he did dives, spanned the debris field, tried to see if he could figure out anything. And he did find something interesting, but it took him a long time to finally figure it out. In 2020, according to him, the mystery has been solved. Now, I don't agree with this part, but we're going to get to that. Using more modern technology, they did another sweep of the area. This time, they found a significant mound of metal buried under silt. Now, you may be wondering, well, why would it be buried? Well, that's because it's a river. As we learned from those New Zealand engines, the second you put something in a river, the river's going to bury it. It's going to happen, inevitably. Especially something heavy that can't be moved very easily, even with the pressure of the water. The silt builds up, buries it, coats over it, whatever, so they expected it to be buried in the first place. But this was a really large mound of metal. Really, really perplexing. And the thing is, 8 to 10 tons isn't heavy enough to be the original engine, but Eric argues that, yeah, but the original engine can't be intact. First of all, the cabs of these engines were wood. Okay, the wood's gone. There's no way it was preserved, so we know that. That, and the forward trucks, as well as the cow catchers, weren't actually directly attached to the engine in any real way. It was just the weight of the boiler that kept them in place. So those probably aren't even with the engine itself. Based on these findings, he suspects, and completely believes that he's found where the final resting place of 508 happens to be. Despite CPR insisting that they actually recovered it and were using it, without any evidence to the contrary when it comes to pictures of it or things like that, Eric's pretty convinced that it's actually there, under the water, buried under silt, where it will probably stay, because this is the part of the conversation where we get into, well, should we bring it up? Well, it's a little itsy-bitsy problem that's buried under a mound of silt, and I can promise you it's probably not in very good condition. After all, the cab is gone, and, the forward trucks and the cab, there's a bunch of pieces not on it. The other issue is that there are examples of 440s all over the place. It was a very, very popular setup for steam engines. So it's not like that this particular type of engine is necessarily that unique. So the act of getting it out of there, it being in rough shape probably, and it not really being worth preserving, it's one of those things, but honestly, part of me wonders if CPR might actually be telling the truth. Eric's own research, and I commend him for it, don't get me wrong, but my argument here is that, okay, you found a bunch of metal, though. Well, that could be frickin' anything! I'm not saying it isn't 508, but what I am saying is CPR told you it's not down there. You think they're wrong, and you think they're just, blowing it off, which they may be. And, you found this large thing. But what if that's a piece of the old bridge? Or a piece of the cars? Or a bunch of other stuff it could possibly be? Until someone gets down there and actually clears the silt out of the way so we can see what it is, it's not a confirmed thing that the engine is even still in the river. Because, like I said, CPR says they took it out, and they said it was scrapped in 1910, which makes sense. But also, what if they're wrong? What if the engine is still there? It's one of those. This is the weirdest mystery I've covered, because we have two arguments where, this engine isn't there. Yes, it is. Well, did you find it? Well, I found a bunch of metal. Okay, but that doesn't prove anything. It could be frickin' natural iron deposits or something. It could literally be anything. And that's kind of where I'm stuck at this with this particular mystery. I don't want to disappoint anybody by saying that the engine's not there, but until we get pictures of it actually being down there and, that solid evidence, picture it didn't happen, man. Magnometers are great, but you gotta deliver on the goods here is all I'm trying to say. So if you really want to prove it's down there, I say clear that silt out and see what that big metal thing actually is. If it is the engine, awesome. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see that it's still there and, see what condition it's in. But beyond that, we're kind of stuck. So, can you call 508 a mystery or not? I don't know. Sutton Lake is located in British Columbia, Canada, and is actually a fjord. A fjord being a body of water that is a narrow inlet, generally similar to a valley that was created by a glacier. Sutton Lake isn't exactly small, it's 22 kilometers or 14 miles long, and lies at about 243 meters above sea level. So I suppose the question remains, how did a train wind up in this lake, in Canada, again? Well, let's take a step back to the Pacific Great Eastern Railway, or PGE. The Pacific Great Eastern Railway was a private rail company established in 1912. However, it was acquired by the provisional government in 1918. In 1972, they actually renamed themselves to British Columbia Railway, and then in 1984, they took on a new name, BC Rail. BC Rail is still technically around today. However, in 2004, they were leased off to another company, Canadian National Railway. Well, at least it wasn't CPR, because that would be really annoying. But back at the time of this accident, they were still the Pacific Great Eastern Railway, PGE. PGE operated a line of track that is actually still there to the north of Sutton Lake. And it was on that track that a particular engine suffered a rather unfortunate fate. Pacific Great Eastern 280 number 53 was pulling a train on January 3rd, 1950. This wheel layout is known as a consolidation, and they're actually very good steam locomotives. The 8 driving wheels gave them pretty good tractive effort for their size, and they were used prevalently right up until the end of steam. Ultimately, though, it wouldn't matter how good the steam locomotive was that night, because at mile 117 on the track, number 53 ran into a rock slide. Yep, the exact same fate as 694, just in a different body of water. Number 53 slammed into the rocks, derailed, and crashed into the lake. The engineer and fireman on board were both killed. sources are pretty hazy regarding what happened after that. How much of the train actually went into the lake, whether there was an attempted recovery of the bodies of the men who were killed, and also the men's names. In fact, this is one of the most obscure sunken trains I've ever discussed, because on top of everything else, no one ever saw it again after that. It's still missing. We know it went in, we know where it went in, but no one's ever attempted, to my knowledge, to actually locate it. And the reason for this probably has to do with the lake itself. The Sutton Lake, like I said, is a fjord, but the thing is, it's actually very, very deep. Way deeper than you might expect. The average depth of this lake is 460 meters, or 1,500 feet. So, this isn't exactly a shallow body of water we'd be searching to try to find this locomotive. And I bet the railway probably said the same thing. Once it went in, they didn't have the ability or the tools to effectively search for this thing. It was gone, and it remains gone. And now we have the question of, well, what about if we bring it up? Well, that would be a great thing to talk about if I hadn't had to talk about it 87,000 times before. But to be brutally honest, before we even get to that, we have to discuss finding it in the first place. Nothing I've been able to find points to anyone attempting to search for this locomotive inside the lake. Not with diving equipment, not with an ROV, not even with a magnometer, nothing. So out of all the locomotives I've discussed, this may be one of the most obscure and difficult to find ghost trains, purely on the basis of the limited details we have, as well as the depth of the body of water in question. This is a deep body of water that we'd be searching in for a locomotive that, well, may not be in great shape. Now, I'm not too worried about rust because A, freshwater, B, it went down in 1950, so it hasn't been down as long as a lot of the locomotives we discussed before. My concern is, if we compare it to 694, this locomotive went in the same way. It slammed into a rock slide. And that means it probably already suffered damage before it even hit the water, let alone the damage it would suffer from falling in, or slamming into the bottom, or anything else that could have happened. Remember, 694, while it is in pretty good shape from a deterioration perspective, like with the rust, it's not really in great shape when it comes to surviving the impact. It's in multiple pieces. Number 53 is probably in a similar situation, and it's also probably much deeper. That means if you did find it, and it miraculously was somehow intact, and then you somehow got to the point of financing bringing it back up, then you'd have to deal with boiler pressure changes. Without getting into too many of the details involving the science behind this, the point is that if you brought it up when it was at a substantial depth, if you somehow financed that hypothetically, and you brought it up when it was hundreds of feet under the surface, it means you'd not only have to bring it up very slowly, but you'd also have to risk the possibility of the boiler bursting because the pressure would change outside of it as it began to surface. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it, but it's one more thing we have to consider whenever you bring it up. And to be honest, it doesn't matter, because we don't know where this thing is. The year was 1944, and once again we are discussing the Pacific Great Eastern Railway, which is now of course BC Rail, which is now actually leased to Canadian National, but whatever. Back then, it was Pacific Great Eastern. We've already discussed that, I won't go into it again. And the body of water in question today is Anderson Lake, which I'm sure someone will come in the comments and be like, actually, it's pronounced Anderson Lake, or something weird, because words that I'd say here never get pronounced the way I think they are, and yeah. But Anderson Lake, which is what I'm gonna go with, because that's what it looks like, to me, is a lake in British Columbia, once again. And it's a decent-sized lake, about 11 square miles, and weirdly, it is in fact in spitting distance of Sutton Lake, which you may be weirded out by because last time I called it Sutton Lake, because that's what it looks like. But no, apparently, according to locals that have come to me, it's actually pronounced Seaton, whatever, that one, from the last time we talked about a sunken train, yes. It is so close that, in fact, 20,000 years ago, they were the same lake, Anderson and Seaton, but a large landslide occurred that separated the two, and they've been separate bodies of water ever since. But that's only the start of the story that's weird. Two lakes that were originally one lake, both having a locomotive in them, is already odd enough, but the similarities between these two cases gets weirder. The answer to the question was Pacific Great Eastern number 56, which was a 280, which you may recognize as being the exact same wheel layout as number 53 from the last video with Sutton Lake. And they didn't just have the same wheel layout, apparently they were the same model of locomotive as well. Number 56 and number 53 were sister locomotives. So the same type of locomotive wound up in two lakes in the same province that were originally the same lake. And I bet you're wondering, how did number 56 wind up at Anderson Lake? Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you. Guess what? On August 12th, 1944, it hit a rock slide and went into the lake, and it has never been recovered, which you also may recognize as the exact same way that number 53 wound up in Sutton Lake. So we have two locomotives that are the same model, sister locomotives, that wound up in two separate lakes right next to each other. The lakes, Anderson and Sutton, were originally the same lake, and they went into the lakes in the exact same way. Now, they didn't go in the same year. This was 1944, so 56 actually went into Anderson before, because 53 went in 1950, but still, I'm not one to be superstitious about the stuff. You know, I don't believe in aliens, I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in any of that stuff. I go with what I know to be a fact, and yet this whole thing just comes across as just a little bit spooky. You know, one might say coincidence. I say probably yes, but still really weird. So yes, number 56 remains in Anderson Lake, and I could not determine whether anyone had ever attempted to locate it at all. There's no information regarding anyone diving down, anyone using an ROV, or anything like that, though it is worth mentioning that Anderson Lake is not as deep as Sutton Lake. Anderson Lake's max depth is only about 705 feet, which is still a great deal, but that's its max depth, and it's only half of the average depth of Sutton, which is 1,500 feet. So it's likely that number 56 would be a lot easier to reach if someone were to try. Now the question is, can we get it out of there? What condition could it be in? Well, much like number 53, we don't have enough information to know what kind of condition the locomotive would be in. If we compare it to 694, again, hit a rock slide, it's probably not in great shape, it probably hit it pretty hard, and it's probably damaged, without question. But it won't be as deep as number 53 will be, so it's likely that it may be more intact, but then we're always back to the whole thing of getting it back up and the cost and all that other stuff that I've already gone into in previous episodes, so feel free to watch those for that more detailed explanation that I've stretched out way too much, because I'm not going into it again. We're not doing that this time. The point is that we haven't even found the thing. We don't know where she is. And until we do, we can't even talk about restoration or recovery or anything like that. We have to know where she's located. But it happened in 1944, so she's been down there nearly 80 years, so, you know, probably not in the greatest of condition, but you never know. Maybe she didn't hit the rock slide that hard. Maybe she's in great shape. Maybe she's pristine. Maybe she's still running down there. Maybe there's a tiny, tiny railroad underneath Anderson Lake for the mer people to use. You don't know. We don't know anything anymore. What we know is that there were two sister locomotives that went into lakes that were originally the same lake, the same exact way, and it's really weird, and I can't get over that. It still bothers me. Does that bother you? What? Now, the Seaboard Roanoke Railroad is, a really old railway. They were organized in 1833 as the Portsmouth and Roanoke Railroad. They were never the largest rail line in the world, but in the 1880s they became part of the Seaboard airline railway system, which extended all the way down to Florida. And then they merged in 1967 with the Atlantic Coastline to become the Seaboard Coastline. And then in the 80s they merged again with the Chessie system to form CSX. Aha! There's a name we finally know. CSX is one of the big names in freight transportation in America, and if you live here, you've probably seen an engine or two by them if you're a train spotter. But that's not what we're here. We're here to talk about the train that's underwater. Engine number 2. That's the shortest number I've ever had to talk about when it comes to one of these engines. How did this train wind up underwater? Well, I take you to what is now present-day Carr Lake. Haha, Carr Lake. Yeah, I'm glad I know that's how you pronounce it. See, UK, you guys get mad about me mispronouncing stuff, but don't worry, we spell things really stupid over here, too, and pronounce it way differently from the way it looks. It's not just you, alright? I don't know what happened to the English language. I am I am a published author, and I write in English, and I still don't understand why we do this stuff. It doesn't matter. Now, Carr Lake isn't actually a lake, but it's a reservoir. It's impounded by the John H. Carr Dam. Oh, that's where the car comes from. It's all your fault, John. That was constructed between 1947 and 1952. And while there is a current railroad bridge over Carr Lake, that is not the bridge that we're dealing with. Back in 1918, when the crash actually occurred, there wasn't a lake there. There was, in fact, just a few isolated creeks. And over one of the larger creeks was a big old trestle bridge. In March of that year, there had been a forest fire that scorched the bridge, but they deemed it safe because safety standards back then were basically non-existent, as I keep mentioning. Although, you're gonna love this though, allegedly, they did test the bridge at least one time with the tried-and-true scientific method of, and I promise you this is what my source says they actually did. They actually sent a locomotive over the bridge, unmanned. The driver and fireman started it, then jumped off, let the engine run over the bridge, and then a different driver and fireman on the other side climbed back on and then stopped it. There's nothing scientific about this. But after that, apparently they deemed it safe because it looked fine. It's just a little fire. What could possibly go wrong? It's fine. Don't worry about it. Yes, it has a bunch of scorch marks on it, but that's just superficial. What? The trestle's made of wood and that... Shh. It'll be fine. Engine number 2 was going over the bridge on March 27th, 1918. On board were actually 2 brothers, Ben the engineer and Burton the fireman. The bridge, was not safe, as you may have predicted, and a section collapsed, taking the engine as well as the rest of the train and the 2 brothers down into the creek. Sadly, they did not survive. An effort was made to get the engine out, but allegedly it was buried in the mud, and they didn't have the means to actually extract it, so it was left for all that time. And then they put Carr Lake over it. And it was still there. And even now, as I speak, it is still there. In fact, apparently there was a time when it was normal for swimmers, because Carr Lake is very popular for leisure activities, to dive down into the lake and ring the engine's bell, which is still attached. This might just be an urban legend, but some of the sources say this is a thing that actually occurred. And even though it's underneath a lake, apparently the engine is only 50 feet down. And allegedly, a bunch of divers did some investigation and found the remains of the engine along with one of the cars. But you may notice so far that I've been remarkably vague in terms of what exactly the engine is. And, okay, first of all, one of the sources I found was actually a local news report from 2010. And I'll be real with you, it kind of is a great example of why I can't trust anybody anymore. Because I swear to you, I knew less about this engine after viewing the news report on it. And I don't even know how you do that. I feel like part of my brain was like sapped of energy from viewing this thing because it was so vague and sensationalist and just like, oh, there's a train. It didn't give me any good information. But the thing that really made me mad about it was that they presented 2 pictures of the engine in question, engine number 2. Now, I'm going to happily display both these pictures, and I want you guys to give a cursory examination and tell me what's wrong. Do you see it yet? Do you see why I was so irritated? Because again, the news report said that these were both the same locomotive. But if you actually look at them, hey, those are 2 different wheel layouts. This one has 6 driving wheels. It's a 10-wheeler. This one only has 4. It's an American. So, what the heck is the deal here? Either the news report was just plain frickin' wrong, which is possible. I mean, they could have easily missed this because they clearly didn't take the time to do a proper report and give people any actual information, because that would have been helpful. Or, and they could have mentioned this, and I want to stress, I have found no source that actually confirmed this, but it does make some logical sense based off of my educated guessing here, but it is just that, guessing. It could actually be the same locomotive, and it was rebuilt into a 10-wheeler. By 1918, Americans were on the way out, and 10-wheelers were the mainstay with a lot of railways. So it's not unreasonable to suggest that an older model American locomotive, instead of being scrapped, was simply rebuilt into a 10-wheeler. That, again, is pure conjecture, and I have literally no basis for saying so beyond just assuming the best here, in that these pictures do have technically the same locomotive in them, but, you know, all I'm saying is trust no one. And try to get information from, like, viable sources, like your own reading and actual educated books written by historians that actually know what they're talking about, and not some sensationalist news media nonsense that did nothing but make me feel dumber for having viewed it. Ugh. Anyway, so the engine's still there, apparently. Should it be raised, is the question. Regardless of which picture is of the actual engine, or if it's both, whatever, it doesn't really matter in this case, they both have wooden cabs. So the cab is, gone. It's absolutely, without question, not there anymore. The actual metal components probably are. There's a couple issues here. It was buried in the mud, so it probably took forward damage. And this particular locomotive, whether it's American or a 10-wheeler, is not a locomotive that has not seen preservation. Many heritage railways have either or, possibly both. But it is also only in freshwater, so it might have held up pretty well, so who knows, it might be a nice display piece for a museum or something. I mean, if someone actually wants to do it. It is only 50 feet down, apparently. If you can get it out of the mud, I mean, it might be worth it, but you'd have to fund that expedition. And, you know, 50 feet down is still 50 feet down. It'd still be a pain in the butt. And no, even if they get it out, it probably won't run again. Okay, this is something we keep going over. Generally speaking, an engine that has been waterlogged for 100 years will not be able to operate safely under steam pressure anymore without extensive rebuild work. So, yeah. Just so we're clear on that. I know I keep having to say that, but having said it repeatedly, I still get sometimes people say that say no, but there was this one time where this, look, it's possible, sure, but the problem is I have to give you guys realistic expectations on this kind of stuff. And the notion that someone would go through the financial burden of bringing this locomotive up, and then go through the additional financial burden of refurbishing it extensively to the point that I would say would almost be a complete rebuild of the whole thing is very, very, very unlikely. That's all I'm trying to say here. Right now the engine's still under the lake, and it will probably stay there. But you know what really makes me mad? The divers that apparently went down and, found it, there's no pictures of this. Not one. Not a single one took pictures of the locomotive under the water, and they said they found it. What? Guys, pics or it didn't happen. I have to deliver good information to my viewers. I try to give the best facts I am able to at any given time. I make occasional errors, I know this, but I do my best here. And when you guys can't even give me pictures of the train you allegedly found underwater, what does that even mean? What does it even say about you? You know? You guys are killing me. Please, somebody, it's 50 feet down. Get a waterproof cell phone. I don't care. I just want to see what it looks like. This is another engine belonging to the Canadian Pacific Railway, and this was an N2. N2s could be classed under A, B, or C. I couldn't quite figure out exactly which one this engine was. 3512. There's so the information about this engine is very scattered. But I know it was an N2. N2s, like I already said, are 280s. Steam engines, again, fairly small, but not the worst steam engines ever. Certainly quite the opposite. They were pretty reliable for their size. But towards the end of their life, some of them started being rebuilt as 282s to try to help them pull larger trains. But some of them, such as 512, were never remodeled. But to be fair, it kind of went away before it could that could happen to her. Now, the actual date of the incident is a little dubious, and I figured out why pretty quick. Because some sources say it happened in 1946, some sources say it was in 1947. However, the only source to give me an exact date states January 1st, 1947, which means that this happened on New Year's or very close to it, which would explain the differentiating dates involved. So we're going to say around New Year's, 1946, 1947. Either way, this engine was on a barge on Slocan Lake. Slocan Lake is a lake in British Columbia. It's one of the deepest lakes out there, and barges were sometimes used by railways to move their trains. It wasn't always economical to build rail around usually smaller bodies of water, just because of the extra expense in laying the rail around it. The Great Lakes are so big that barges, and there's so many stops on them, that doing a barge on the Great Lake, unless you were going directly to the opposite lake, it wasn't necessarily reasonable. It made sense just to build around it. But on a smaller, regular lake like Slocan, a barge is a bit more economical because you can stop the train at the coast. You can, it can wheel it and its cars on the barge, move it across the lake, and then it goes on its way. And nothing, no problem there. Except there was a problem that day. What happened was, some sources say the barge in question was leaky, which is dubious at best. I can't quite confirm that was the case. But whatever happened, the barge that the engine and several of the cars, including a snowplow, were on, began to list heavily. Now, nobody died during this incident, which is fortunate. I can actually kind of joke about it now, because there's no deaths, no loss in terms of mourning or anything like that, no mystery here, because there were plenty of witnesses to what happened. The barge tilted over, and the engine, along with its tender, caboose, and a snowplow, went into the lake and down to the bottom. Now, beyond the potential leaky barge, or the fact that maybe there was some weight distribution problems on the on the train itself that could have been also part of the problem, there wasn't much in terms of investigation that I'm able to find, because everyone kind of knew what happened. Nobody died. There were no deaths to worry about. It was just a loss in terms of product and, a train. It was gone. It was a tax write-off, basically, at that point. Which is unfortunate, but, it happens. But 3512 is still on the bottom of Slocan Lake, and it has been located. I was unable to find any real footage of the wreck itself, but based on the pictures and witness accounts that I'm able to turn up, the engine is still in remarkably good condition, probably because, unlike 694, which slammed into a rock slide and then probably slammed into the cliffs on its way down into Lake Superior, 3512 just went straight in the water. And it's a deep lake. It's about 600 feet down. So it would have hit pretty hard, but beyond that, it would be otherwise fairly intact. And it is, for the most part. Currently, there's a film crew working with witnesses, as well as planning to go down and get some footage of the wreck to do a documentary on the loss of this particular train, which I actually am incredibly intrigued by. I hope it turns out well, and I hope they have great success. One thing I'm super excited by is that they were able to interview the only surviving crew member to this date. By surviving, I mean, not dying of natural causes yet, because this happened in 1947. This gentleman is 97 years old. But his name is Bill Chapman. He was the brakeman on board that day, and they were able to secure an interview with him and discuss what actually occurred, and I think that would be super interesting. But because they're still working on the actual documentary, they haven't actually disclosed any real details about that interview as it stands right now. The only other thing is that there has been discussion among some rail fans that I'm able to turn up regarding the potential to raise this particular engine, because 3512, unlike 694, is in extremely good condition, all things considered. Again, it's a freshwater lake. It hasn't been down nearly as long, and in some of the pictures I'm able to find, you can actually still see some of the letterheads. Like, it's in much better shape. But I need to stress at this time how hideously unlikely that is to occur. The reason for this is twofold, but the first one is financially. Even if it's in good shape and the raising goes off without a hitch, it's in very deep water. This is going to be an expensive task. You need heavy lift equipment, you need a bunch of people who are certified, trained to deal with this kind of salvage operation, and then in terms of getting the investment in, what kind of return could anyone expect? Why would we be raising her? And the easiest thing would be, a static display option. But a static display is never going to be worth nearly as much as it's going to cost to bring it back up. and running operation would require years of additional work on top of, just restoring the static display is one thing, but actually getting 3512 to run again, that would take so much effort, and no one would be willing to invest that kind of money when there are other examples of her type of locomotive still in restored and some in running condition. The other problem is that there is an issue involving safety. Largely because 3512 is intact, there is the concern about her boiler. We don't exactly know what's in her, and there's environmental hazards to consider, whether it be asbestos or any other such gunk that could be, inside this train. Because the boiler hasn't been opened, it's intact, the chances of a pressure change causing a rupture is not impossible, meaning there's a major safety hazard here for all involved, whether it be just the environment of the lake or the people doing the, bringing the train back up. So basically what I'm saying is that's not going to happen. 3512 will likely, much like 694, stay exactly where she is. I would love to see, someone bring up a piece of her, perhaps the bell or the whistle, like people usually like to get, but outside of that, I can't imagine the train ever being brought back to the surface wholly.